It's 11 o'clock on the dot. Welcome to SeritiTALKS, a platform that brings together development practitioners, communities, academics, policymakers, founders, and other stakeholders to share knowledge, ideas, and experience. I am your host, Millicent Mabota, and today we are diving into how to use data. We are diving into our conversation about how to use data to tell stories for impact. Joining us today is Ximena, a social change facilitator and associate of Seriti, alongside Mbeki, Ndlovu, a monitoring, evaluation, research, and learning officer at Seriti. Welcome to SeritiTALKS. How are you guys doing?
Thank you, Millicent. Yes, very excited about the session. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Millicent. We're doing very fine.
That's great. Before we dive into our discussion today, please note that this session is being recorded and will be available on our website. Stuart, can you share where they can see our key points for the day? So these will be our key discussion points. Please stay engaged. Use the chat box for any questions or any comments or any stories that you want to share with us. And now I'm going to hand over to Ximena and Mbeki to take us through this learning journey. Ximena, over to you. You are on mute. Ximena?
Thanks, Millicent. Having some technical issues. Okay, we are there. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. And as Millicent said, yes, today we're going to explore the idea of telling a story with data. So how many of you have heard of any of these concepts? So we've got user-centered design, design thinking, human-centered design. Please pop it into the chat. Just out of curiosity to know if anybody, we just want to get the sense in the room. Millicent and Struan and Mbeki are helping me just to make sure that we get the sense. Are we getting the sense? People are familiar with these terms? Not really familiar. It's kind of new. How we doing? What are people saying?
So far, there are no messages coming through. I think maybe we should give them 5 seconds more.
Okay, let us know. Is this stuff totally weird? Is it something that you think, oh, I've heard some of these terms. I know I might know something. If you don't know, it's perfectly natural too. So just pop in, I have no clue. Because I think there's quite a few people that probably haven't heard these terms. Are we still lukewarm?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to presume people don't know what I'm talking about, so I'm going to carry on. Really, this is about imagining yourself in somebody else's shoes. And so it's about, and then you ask yourself, well, what's this got to do with storytelling and data? Well, how a story lands has got everything to do with your audience. So it's really about empathy. But in today's world, getting anyone to take notice of your story is difficult, right? There's so many different ways to communicate and everyone is using them. There's sensory overload. I mean, we get how many social media posts are you looking at? Podcasts, webinars, newsletters, emails, blogs, chats, messages. There's just stuff everywhere. So your time is really limited and you are competing for airtime with your audience. People who are already struggling with work-life balance and meetings that can take place anytime, anywhere. So imagine trying to get the attention of a policymaker or funder and how much information they are bombarded with. How do you get their attention when there is such a limited window? I mean, these are really some of the things that keep me and some of the Seriti team up at night. So this is why we thought it would be useful to explore these kind of things. So in this crowded context, we often struggle to tell our story, especially when we are trying to demonstrate the social impact we are making. And in terms of data, we generally use charts, but these can be quite confusing. I find we often try to include too much detail And then quantifying the change can be difficult. I mean, there's either a lack of data or you mostly have qualitative data, and that's quite hard to package. So what do we do? This is a tough situation. So turning point for me in this context came about last year. And this was when I attended a 2-part webinar that was hosted by the Stanford D School. And it was titled How to Tell Visually Impactful Stories with Data, and run by this lady called Professor Carissa Carter. And she spoke a lot about maps and defined a map as anything where the information on it is displayed somewhat visually and arranged spatially, i.e. organized relatively across a space. And just so that you are aware, the terms data visualization, data story, infographic, chart, framework, and map are used quite interchangeably. So we're going to use all these terms quite interchangeably in this discussion and in this session. But in essence, what she went through is an approach for telling a story using data. You have something to say or show, given some data or info that you have gathered and analyzed. But what struck me most about my experience in participating in this webinar series was how it changed how I think. And this is really what I want to share with you today. So the webinar was really based on her book, which is The Secret Language of Maps, in case anybody's keen to get the book, I'm putting it there. It was a really fantastic webinar, 2-part webinar. And we won't have time to do it justice today. But if there is interest, please do let Millicent know, put it in the chat. And we can always try and see if we can't put together something a little bit more in depth. But for now, the idea was really to try and spark some new connections in your brain, make you think a little bit differently. So let's get into this, exploring different ways of telling a story through data. Okay, so when I sort of Googled how to tell a story with data, you kind of get the same old, right? So this is the status quo. You have your pie charts, you have your bar charts, a few line graphs, maybe something vaguely interesting, but nothing really kind of jumps out at you. And we really need to think of charts as stories. They need to be clear, easy to read, and impactful. And to do things differently requires a bit of strategic thinking, some thoughtful design, some creativity. So to start off, let's get inspired. So let's see what else is out there so that we can start trying something new. Okay, so this one, the base framework is what we all recognize, right? It's the world map. It looks a little bit differently because the variable they're using here is sheep. So they're basically trying to tell us, they're trying to plot out which places in the world have the most sheep. And as most of us would know, Australia seems to be kind of, it could be any map, frankly, because they have lots of sheep. But then you have the US or North America, and this looks like a stick insect, really, really thin. So this is a way where they've taken how many sheep, which is the data, and plotted it in something that we know, which is a map, but it looks really differently. So I don't know if anybody's got any views, but as we go through, please, if anything jumps out at you, please pop it in the chat, and the Seriti team are going to help me with some of the feedback. Right, so this is something that looks a little bit different. Okay, this one is an old one. It's probably one of the first infographics, and it was done by Florence Nightingale in the 1850s. Talks about the deaths suffered in the Crimean War. And okay, so the little red bits, the little red wedges are the deaths suffered from wounds in battle. The black marks indicate deaths from other causes, and the bluish gray ones are the causes of disease, are those deaths caused by disease. So you can see those wedges are quite large. And what Florence Nightingale was really trying to convey and to get more attention around was the fact that actually a lot of these soldiers in the Crimean War weren't dying from their wounds. They weren't dying on the battlefield. They were actually dying in the hospitals, and that was because there were poor sanitary conditions. And so she using this kind of, using the data she had at hand and this infographic, she really managed to get changes in sanitary conditions. So there was a social change. There was some kind of impact in terms of trying to make things better. This is one by Mona Chalabai, and she's a British data journalist of Iraqi descent. And so it's titled Racial Ethnic Categories in the US Census, and it's over time, so in different time periods. And what they're really showing is that over time, the census has really recognized, the US Census has really recognized a much more nuanced categorization and included a lot more different racial and ethnic categories. So it really shows that change, that positive change. And it's quite visually appealing. I don't know what people think of it. Are there any views? I think we're going to, yeah, we'll almost take a quick stop just to sort of get the sense of the room. But I think what really is important in terms of thinking differently about using your data is this process of practicing deconstruction. So looking at these kind of maps and really asking questions. And this is something that Professor Carter really encourages one to do. So you find different maps or infographics that you find interesting, and you interrogate these, like, why do I find it interesting? Is it colorful? Do I like what they're trying to say? Is it interesting? Does it make me come in and want to look more and really explore what they're trying to tell me? So she invites you to ask lots of questions, and what's important is to consider things from the perspective of both the viewer of the map, right, you, as well as the person who created. And also what's particularly important is to pay attention to what you like and what you don't like. There's what makes us interesting as human beings is we're not all the same. So what Mbeki might like, Millicent doesn't like. And that's also important to note, because you might be trying to target a group of people that have similar things that they like. And if you know that, then you can practice, configuring your maps in a way that really appeals to them. Right. I think we're going to stop there and have a quick check-in. Are there any immediate views? I'm going to hand over to Millicent to drive this one. Thanks, Millicent.
Okay, thank you so much. I don't know if you guys are like me, if you've read the definition of what storytelling is, and if you have a different view or you have a story to share with us. I don't see any in the chat box, but if you have something to say, you can raise your hand and then we can quickly engage. And if there's nothing, we'll just dive back into our presentation. So I'm just going to give you guys a minute or two just to gather your thoughts about how you're feeling about the session so far, and if there's something that you want us to talk about. I see a comment saying, I'm loving this webinar. I can't wait to hear more. We do have a lot more for you in store, so please stay in the webinar until we're at the end. So gather your thoughts and let's hear what you guys are thinking about it so far.
Should I carry on? Sorry, Mbeki, carry on.
I wanted to say there's a reply to your initial questions. I think it says keen to go into as much depth as possible at some point. I think it's a response to the other question about whether we want to do some more.
Great, that's useful. Thanks, Mbeki. We'll certainly take note of that. I think we're certainly keen to do something more in depth because it's a really interesting topic, and to do it justice would take a little bit more time. So thanks, Mbeki. Thanks for raising that.
Millicent, there's another comment that says, can we share any kind of platforms or programs that can help us to make these kind of infographics?
So can I take that one, Millicent? Because it's interestingly enough, so in the Stanford webinar, I mean, we had people from all over the world. It was really great. And it was one of the questions that they asked, and they gave a few ideas in terms of platforms. So anything complicated, I recalled, forgive me because I don't remember the details. I mean, we can certainly send that in a follow-up, but things like obviously the Pythons and things like that. But what she really said is, don't be scared of drawing things yourself, of doing things that are simple, handmade, that can be quite powerful. So don't always think that you need these complicated programs, right? So we're going to go through a few examples that will show you that it actually can be quite simple. And what you need to challenge yourself, and I know in the NGO space is exactly the question we ask ourselves, is we don't have a lot of resources to spend on expensive packages or graphic designers or whatever the case is. So we really need to kind of use what we have and be creative. So I would encourage you to be creative. The actual instruments that they mentioned, I can't remember, but I will find them. Millicent, is there a way that we can email people with maybe that detail afterwards? Could we possibly do that?
Yes, we
Great.
can.
Okay, so we'll make a note of that and we'll send that. But yes, please be creative. Use what you have. Don't feel like you're boxed in because you don't have the resources, right? That's, I think, one of the things that as in the social change community, we're really quite good at is being creative. Right. Listen,
we have one more
okay.
question and then we'll go back into the presentation.
Okay, brilliant.
So the person is saying, so Paul is saying, would also love to hear if they have already mentioned how to use photographs as part of the story. So I think you're going to get into that into the second part of the presentation.
Well, not per se, but I again think it's up to you how you want to use it. So I like the question. I think it's fantastic. Hold it and maybe consider it at the end. And you tell us how you think you might want to use a photo, right? Because that's kind of what we want to do. Is we want to make you guys think a little bit differently. So I think it's a great question. And let's put a pin in it for now. Millicent, can I crack on?
Yes, you can.
Let's do it. Okay. All right. So we spoke about a deconstruction. So the deconstruction is looking at kind of maps, infographics, whatever that we find interesting and trying to understand them a little bit better. Like, why were they doing this? And the key to the deconstruction, the first step is understanding what the agenda was of the person who created the map. What was their intention? Like, what were they trying to say to you? And in doing this, there are three key elements. So we consider data, we consider bias, and we consider craft. I'm going to go into those in a bit more detail. Right. So in essence, really, the data is the information you're using to construct your infographic, and it can be quantitative or qualitative or something in between. I think we're all quite familiar with that. Bias comes into it too, defined as how you view things, and that is affected by your personal experience, your beliefs, your culture. So when we judge, for example, how we look at the data, or which data to include, and even which data to present or which data to collect, sometimes your bias creeps in, and you have to be aware of that, and be aware of whoever's infographic you're looking at, considering they might have a bias, and kind of what data did they include, and why did they include that data? Maybe they're trying to kind of, you know, make me go in a specific direction. So we need to consider these things. Craft is very important. So craft is really the visual design of your map, how it's made. So it considers anything from colors, the text you use, the context that you actually use to put up to put your infographic or whatever you wanted to say. You could use a corridor, for example. So I mean, that was really interesting to explore, is to say, okay, I have funders coming into my building often. Why don't I use the boardroom, or why don't I use the passage where they come through, or the reception area, to put up a map that shows what I'm doing, or to tell my story? You know, it's about thinking a little bit differently about things like context. It's not just the web. It's not just our website. It's not just social media. There's so many different ways of looking at this. And these three things are always in tension with each other. They're pushing, like data. We were talking about collecting data. There's some bias around it, and they're always pushing and pulling. And you kind of need to consider that. It's not kind of clear cut. Okay, so as part of the deconstruction, what's also important is, when you're looking at this infographic, is thinking about, or considering, or being sensitive to what different emotions this invokes in you. So you want to unpack all of these different levers that we're talking about. It's the bias, the craft, the data, and kind of, you know, what emotions, what feelings is it invoking, and how is this happening? Like, how are they able to make you feel a certain way? So that's how we want to kind of deconstruct some of these things. So let's give it a go. Okay, let's give it a go. All right, so this one is titled The Simulated Dendrochronology of US Immigration, and it's over the period 1790 to 2016, right? And each dot, and there's lots of dots, represents 100 immigrants. And this is, so immigration in the US, and the different regions are represented by different colors. So dendrochronology, in case people don't know, I certainly didn't know, when they said it, I kind of then understood, is the study of aging of trees, and trees age by adding different rings, right? So we're kind of looking at these different rings, and it's trying to show us how immigration has changed over time. what are your immediate emotions about this? What are you feeling? Like, are you liking this? Is it a bit confusing? Are you not quite sure where to look? You're not quite sure what to think? Maybe just pop in the chat a few immediate reactions for us, and then I'm going to ask Millicent, Mbeki, and just to help me a bit in terms of what people are saying, or are people totally shocked? They're still trying to get over what dendrochronology means, which is very very possible. So to also prompt you a bit, like, look at the colors that they're using, right? Are we getting anything, or are people a little bit shell-shocked?
No movement yet.
No movement yet. Okay.
Maybe they didn't quite get the question. Maybe if you can.
Okay, should I go through it a little bit slowly, a little bit more slowly,
Yes,
Mbeki?
yes, yeah.
Okay, so in essence, this is an infographic where they looked at trying to plot immigration and how it's changed in the US over time. And so each little dot in this picture represents 100 immigrants that have come into the US during a long period. So it's from 1790 to 2016. So it's over time. And if you look, it's from left to right over time, you can see how things have changed. And so the middle circles are really kind of really early on in the 1790s. And as we go out of the circles, then it's later and later. And it's really using this metaphor of a tree and how a tree ages to represent something that actually can be quite inflammatory, right? It's a sticky subject in the US, this immigration, and how it's changed and who's come in and where have they come from and have they been accepted? And, all of it. It's a really, really politically sensitive topic. And these authors have used something that's a little bit of a kind of a calming thing, right? The aging of a tree. It takes long. It's quite a beautiful, quiet process to represent something that's actually pretty tough. So they've really used craft very, very specifically to try and almost make one more kind of calm about something, be able to actually look at the numbers, interrogate it with a sense of peace instead of immediately thinking immigration in the US, oh my goodness, it's quite inflammatory, let's get all fired up. So it's and then the different colors represent different regions, and the colors are quite calm and soothing, calming and soothing. They're pastels, they're not bright. Like, they could have chosen really bright colors and put it out there and made a big bold statement, but it's almost trying to make you like, it's a little bit interesting, and you kind of want to look at it a little bit more. You're a little bit confused, you're not quite sure where to look, but it's a smooth kind of wanting to introduce you to this topic. I don't know if people have found that, or if they found that they couldn't get past the complicated dendrochronology title. I'm not sure, but if there's no immediate comments.
Now we have the comments.
Oh, brilliant.
So we have
Now we have comments.
Okay,
We
brilliant.
have a few comments. Let me summarize them. So
Thanks,
there's
Drew.
a sense that it's very visually appealing
Yes.
to the senses. And there's also a sense that it can be difficult to describe in words.
Yes.
The impression
Yes,
that you get.
Indeed.
That it's thought-provoking, because if you were to do this another more conventional way, like with tables and stats and things, it might be like more complicated, but the colors and the way it looks makes it more intriguing, and it's an inviting illustration, and it's not as passive as just reading text.
Nice. Love those comments. What great comments. Very insightful and really good comments and different comments. Love it. Great. Okay, I'm going to go on to the next one. Let's carry on provoking change. Let's do it. Okay. So this one's an interesting one, and I'm going to invite you. Can we pop into the chat, please, this link? I'm going to invite you to go onto your own browser to the link, because it's an interactive one. If you want to, you can also Google Rich School, Poor School Australia, and it should come up. And it'll be this long infographic. I've got a small sort of screenshot of it, but it's kind of interactive and long. So I'm going to give a little bit of time just for people to find their feet and log onto it. And then I'll carry on. Can I just get the Seriti team to confirm that the link is in the chat? Fabulous.
The link is in the chat?
Yes.
You're stars. Thank you very much. That's awesome. Okay, cool. I'm just going to wait a minute just so people can find their feet. And then I'm going to get into it. And this is a lot of data, right? Basically, these are all the schools in Australia that they're plotting in terms of income. Well, it's income and expenditure. Okay, I'm slowly going to get into it. Hopefully everybody's on the same page. So in essence, this was a project that the Australian Broadcasting Corporation did. Took them a while. I mean, it was a big project. They had to kind of scrape data from everywhere they could find to get income and spending data for all the schools in Australia. So they used board meetings, committee meetings, whatever they could find. And what they really wanted to show is the big divide between rich and poor schools and how it's really grown. And so they came up with this really, really interesting infographic, which, as I said, is super long. So it's from the top of the slide all the way to the bottom is actually that infographic, but you can't see it when you're on the website itself. You have to kind of scroll down and scroll down, which is also something they did on purpose, right? They didn't put all the data in one place. They make you scroll down and scroll down and scroll down. So we're going to go to the top of it. Okay, so this is the top of it. So this is where the really wealthy schools are. And the circles, the bigger the circle, the more money they have, the more income they have. And then they divided into three kinds of schools: the Catholic, the independent, and the government schools. And so this is a bit the most wealthy school is the big independent school. They've got a huge budget. And then we go right down to the bottom. So I'm pretending we're on the website. We're scrolling, and we eventually get to the bottom. Okay, and this is at the bottom. So it's this long teardrop of schools. And you can see all these different colors. And now there's a lot of kind of government schools down here. And the circles are smaller. There's a range of circles, but there's a lot of small circles. And they're all clustered together at the bottom, and they're kind of competing for space, right? Whereas at the bottom, it was kind of open. I'm on my own. And here that everybody's competing. So what they've done is represented what it's like to compete for budget, compete for space. And most of the schools are kind of clustered together. How do people feel about this? I mean, what are the views? Do you find this interesting? Yeah, I'd like to hear more.
Yeah, look, I think our audience takes a while to process. So far, we don't have comments, but I'm sure we'll see.
Okay. Well, maybe play around with the graph a little bit. Let's give you a few seconds, a minute to play around with the graph, and just see if you have any immediate comments. I mean, they really tried to take. What was also interesting is that so they haven't to give examples of what might be in this mass, right? Because it's really hard to look at this and trying to kind of figure out. They've given you these little snapshots of some schools to give you an idea of kind of what are the issues in some of these schools. And so at the top, we had, I'm going to go to at the top we had this very wealthy school, and they were spending on a big sports stadium or something. I can't remember the exact details, but it was kind of, really elite infrastructure. Whereas you come to the bottom of this teardrop and, you're talking about things like overcrowding and leaking roofs, and they just need to have compliant toilets. So it's such a different, it's like two worlds apart, which they're really trying to show you, right? It's almost two universes. They're so far apart from each other. The issues that they're dealing with, the money, how much money they're getting, plus what they're spending on. So they kind of took out certain schools to show examples on the side with these little blocks with a little bit of extra information to give you a little bit of extra information. And kind of beef up what you could see in the graph.
So one person says that it tells a really, really strong story, and someone else says it can be a bit overwhelming.
Absolutely. And they've used that on purpose, right? Because it is overwhelming. It makes you think, geez, how do these schools feel? Right? How do these schools feel right in the bottom of this graph? They probably feel quite overwhelmed too. So that's part of the agenda of the people who are doing this. They want you to feel a bit overwhelmed, because that's kind of how these people have felt, how the schooling, the differences, the inequality is feeling. But that's great. Those are really good comments.
And it ties into another comment which says it really personalizes the data, reminding you that these are people and children behind the dots.
Yes, that's a wonderful comment. Absolutely. And again, you know, somebody asked about a photograph. What you can actually do a similar way. You could actually do the same. I mean, we have a program called Arabapeleng, which works with parents and caregivers to help them become more active and present and support the development of their children. So you could almost use something like this, but to make it personal, like you said, you could take a dot that represents a person or a child or a parent and have a story, right? You could have a little testimonial, something like that. I mean, you can be creative around how you use these things. You can have a picture that really brings it home. It isn't just a dot, it's a person, it's a school, it's a it's a food garden, it's a whatever, you know, whatever you're using, you can use this kind of thinking to personalize it. That's great. Struan, any other comments?
Just another one, that it's important to create data integrity for your organization and take your visuals seriously. Absolutely.
That's a really fantastic comment. And it's something that in the webinar came up time and time again, and she called it limp data. I really loved it. So Professor Carter said, no limp data. And it's 100%. Like, this is not the back end, right? This is, we're seeing the final product. So it's only as good as how robust your data is. So 100%. That's a very, very important comment.
There's no more, so perhaps we can move on.
Okay, let's go on. Okay. Millicent, I'm going to hand over to you. Do we want a quick check-in, or should we carry on? You're in charge. You let me know.
I think we can just continue with our presentation and then we'll do the check-in.
Brilliant. Okay, let's do that. Okay, all right. So these are some other interesting ones that came up. So the one on the left is the global carbon footprint. So they've used, the craft has been that they've used an actual footprint, and then the circles represent how big your global carbon footprint, how big your carbon footprint is as a country. So we have sort of China is the big orange one, and the US is the big green one. So they're the big polluters. Russia's quite big, India's quite big. The colors represent different continents. So you can see Europe, North America, the greener ones, Asia, orange, you know, really kind of the most important. Africa's kind of squeezed into a toe or two, really very small. These purple ones, not a big impact in relative terms. South Africa, from an African perspective, is the biggest one, then followed by Egypt. And it's just, you know, it's just an interesting way of presenting something that we all kind of know, but you know, it kind of wants you to interrogate a little bit. It invites you a little bit to like let's see, like, who's there? Like, let's look at a little bit more. Yeah, interesting one. And this one, which is basically trying to look at sort of, you know, your regular bar chart. How can you make it different? So you could use a bar chart, but you could make it slightly different. You could use different hand signals. So it makes it a lot more interesting, could bring an added layer of meaning. You could do something cultural. So for example, one of the things that I want to play around with, and I haven't had a chance to, is on Seriti's Arabapeleng program, I want to play around using maybe Lego bricks or something that represents children and makes it fun and you know, something playful. And I mean, you guys can do the same thing. So you might have something that an existing chart, and look, it's hand drawn, right? This is, and I know because I'm not a very good artist, but what you could do is in a group of people, there's always somebody who's you actually draw as well. You just have to find them. and work with them and say, this is what I want to represent. Can you help me draw it? Let's try and draw it. Do something different. Use, I don't know, you could use pieces of cardboard and take a photograph of it, or you can really be creative. Don't let yourself be limited to the status quo. That slide that I put right in the beginning, where I Googled like how to tell a story through data, and I just got a bunch of pie charts, a bunch of bar charts. You know, let's not be limited by that. Let's think a little bit creatively, right? Okay, let's think a little bit more creatively. Okay, this one's interesting. So generally, when we're talking about income, we'll talk about maybe social class, we might talk about different countries. You know, that's generally how we portray this differential of income inequality or distribution of income. We might do it by race, you know, it depends. We can do it by various things, but this one was interesting because it was done, it's mapping the distribution of income. This is again in the US. So it's mapping the distribution of income by religious belief. So they've basically taken these little images at the bottom are images of different churches, and they've kind of clustered them in terms of Christian, and then they've got Jehovah's Witness, they've got Buddhist, they've got Muslim, Hindu, Orthodox, they've got all the different religions that are recognized in the United States, and then they've said, okay, within each of those groups, like, how is income distributed within those groups? And the top part, which is darker, represents kind of the wealthier individuals in each group, and that's an income bracket of over $100,000 US. And then as it gets lighter, it's people who earn a little bit less, more like us, right? We would be in the lighter groups. And so, but what's interesting is what it represents is, you see in the churches or groups of religious belief, where there's more dark blocks, it actually really quickly shows you kind of where there's more wealthy people, right, in different religions. So obviously, you know, you could interrogate it and say, well, you're not including this or you're not including that. So let's just take it at face value. We're not interrogating the data by any means, but it's just an interesting way of presenting something. It's just a different way of presenting something and using icons. You could use icons here, for example, of things that are easily recognizable. I can't think of anything off the bat, but you know, you could maybe, if you wanted to represent, for example, countries, instead of always doing it the same way, you could almost maybe do the symbol for the currency or whatever here, and do these different columns. So this is just a different way of kind of presenting some data. I like this one. This is one of my favorites. So this one uses craft. So it's super simple. It's basically a paper dispenser in a bathroom. They've used green paper. They've used the South American continent, which we know is associated with the Amazon, which is known as the kind of lungs of the earth. It's where we've got all these trees, and deforestation there means that, you know, global warming goes up, and pretty much we're all stuffed, right? If it looks like the one on the right, we know we're in big trouble. So it's in essence trying to sensitize you to use less paper, right? The more paper you use, the darker the continent becomes. And so yeah, I thought it was a very powerful, very simple way of doing things. So, and they're not even using data here that, you know, it's not a particular data source that they've used. They've used something that we kind of accept, most people accept, and they're trying to make a statement here, something that we kind of feel is pretty much a statement. Okay, this one I also quite like. It's a really interesting one. So this one, notes. Yes, it's an Italian lady called Valentina De Filippo, and basically this is representing deaths in war. Quite a heavy topic, right? Deaths in war, and represented, each war is represented by a remembrance poppy, and the size of the poppy represents how many deaths can be attributed to that war. So the biggest poppies are, the one on the left is the First World War, and the one on the right is the Second World War. And so those are the ones with the kind of biggest deaths, the greatest amount of deaths. The stem represents the length of the wall. So it starts off on the left, and where it ends is on the right. We note that it only goes up to 2010, right? So some of these, for example, the Israel versus Palestine one, obviously that's still ongoing. So it's just cut in terms of a certain period of time. And you know, again, I can't talk to the robustness of the data and whether they've missed stuff and whatever. We can't really talk to that. The issue is really around looking and saying, well, wow, how have they're presenting something? Oh, and the different colors, I think, are where the wars took place. I can't actually remember. Yes, it's the different regions. So it's the different colors. But they could have, this is quite interesting because they could have used tombstones, right? Or something really explicit and almost heavy, whereas they chose to use a flower, a remembrance poppy, to portray something quite heavy. And it almost looks like these flowers are kind of swaying in the wind. So it's again, it's a bit like the tree one. They've taken something that can be pretty difficult to tackle and trying to convey something in a calm, peaceful way. Like let's remember the people that have died in these wars, and remember them in a beautiful way. This one goes back to the issue of the pic photo and how do we do things simply. Like, this person just wanted to make a statement. There's no data behind this. Okay, this person just said it's kind of it's just a statement. There's no reveal. So Carter calls it a reveal. The one before, the one about the remembrance poppies, that was a bit of a reveal, right? We didn't quite know what it was about. So we had to interrogate it. We had to kind of look in and read a bit and see, okay, what are the poppies and the size of the poppy and what does it mean? And really made us kind of want to interrogate it a bit more. This one's in your face. There's not a lot you have to interrogate. It's there. It's asking a question. It's making a statement. Yeah, and so this is a different way of portraying it. You might actually want to advocate for something, and you might want to just get somebody's attention, and you can visually do that. And so Michelle Real is someone who uses this kind of thing a lot, where she uses real objects included in her things. Okay, I'm done. So my challenge to you is be brave. Be creative, collaborate, right? All of the people that are in this room today are interested in doing things differently. If there's people in the room that you know, collaborate with them. You know, get data sets together, get ideas together, do things together. Let's make it an interesting space. Let's brainstorm, let's work together to make it interesting. And you know, a lot of the time we have common agendas. Let's get together and put it out there, make these statements like Michelle Real. And make sure that we get noticed, because as I said right in the beginning, it's hard to get noticed. So if you do things differently, use things like craft, you can really get noticed. So thanks so much for your time and for the really great comments. I think there will be some more. I'm going to hand it over to Millicent, because I see we have a very important survey. Thanks, Millicent.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I have a poll up. Please do fill it up. We would really love to hear your feedback, but I just wanted to engage Mbeki just a little bit. As you're presenting, I'm thinking to myself, maybe there are people like myself who don't even know how to collect that data to create those stories. So I don't know if Mbeki can give us like a few beginner tips on how to collect that data so that it can make sense when you're trying to build a story. Because it wouldn't help to one-shell a story when I don't even collect the right data. So Mbeki, please just give us an overview of how we would be able to do that.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Millicent. I think, thank you, Ximena, for the very good presentation. Let me say that my own reflection on this presentation is that it sort of challenges us coming from an organization such as Seriti, where we always collect data. Sometimes we struggle to get the message across because we see this data and it's telling us something, and the way that it comes out in our monitoring reports and even in our evaluation reports, sometimes when we share that information, you find that you're not sure whether people understand the gravity of whatever it is that you're trying to put across. And as such, what Ximena is sharing is something that we need to think about as organization or companies. And of course, if we collect data, it requires, I think Millicent is asking about how we collect data. If we have to collect data, most of the times we normally sit down and decide questions. There are questions that we need to answer, and we need to carefully plan around what information are we looking for, and we start to design how that information is going to be collected. Either it's qualitative or quantitative, but effectively, if we link up to what Ximena was sharing today, it means that we need to think of ways in which a lot of data that we have in our organizations, we try to share, and to share differently from our usual ways, so that we get the message across, I suppose. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Mbeki. The poll results are coming in so fast. It's just unfortunate we can't read the one words, because I need to end the poll for me to be able to read that, and I see people are still voting. But however, on the did you find this session helpful? 88% of them said absolutely yes. I found this very informative, and we don't have a no, which is good. We have a few that are on the fence. 11% of them are on the fence, and maybe they will benefit when we do share more of this information on our social media platforms, on about how to use this data to create your story. So we'll go into depth over the next coming weeks. Please be on the lookout for that. We do have time for some questions and some comments. So I'm going to open the floor to the audience, and then once they are done, we're going to wrap up and close off. I'm going to leave the poll open for 2 more minutes, and then I'll close it and then share the final results. Struan, do we have any comments?
Thanks, Melissa. We have quite a few. There's a lot of appreciation for this webinar, and how informative it's been, and how creative the presentation is, and how it inspires people. And there's a nice one about how this really a learning was that you balance the graphic presentation with the data and the sense of what the story is saying. And yeah, just an appreciation for the creativity and how it's people feel inspired.
That's super. Thank you, Struan. I'm glad people feel inspired. I think and thank you so much, everybody, for the great comments. I think the people that are on the neutral, I totally understand. Like, this is not an easy thing to, you kind of grapple a little bit in your head. I had to watch, so the webinar, I had to watch it a few times also to get the kind of all the meat of what was happening. And unfortunately, all the stuff that Mbeki's talking about, incredibly important. How do we gather the data? And so that's some of the depth that was missing, that we couldn't really cover in today's session. And so, maybe Mbeki, we can work on doing a follow-up where we really focus maybe on some of those things. The idea is really also to use the data you have constructively, creatively, but also to see, so you move from one place to the other, right? The data you have versus what do you want to say? And I want to say this, and how can I say it? And what data do I need? And where do I find that data? And being creative around where do I find data? Or what data am I looking for? So it's the whole process needs you to open up your thinking a little bit too. So certainly it's something that we would be keen to help continue to kind of build those layers. So thanks very much for those comments.
Thank you so much once again to everyone who has joined us, who participated, was engaged, and I hope you really have learned a lot, and that you will continue the work that you've learned today. So just to pull in the final count on our poll, we have 90% saying absolutely yes, this was so helpful, and our neutral has decreased by 1%. So we're now sitting on 10 from 11%. I love that for everybody. And thank you so much once again for everybody who's joining us. We've reached the end of our presentation. And I don't know about you, but as for myself, I am itching to use my reports to start telling stories. I'm going to leave you with the famous quote by the Harry Potter author that says, "There's always room for a story that can transport people to another place." Thank you so much. Have a good day going further, and do connect with us on all our social media platforms at Seriti Institute. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Have a lovely day.
Yes.
Bye.